I'm Dave Ganskopp of the Eastern Oregon Ag Research Center with an Eastern Oregon Ag Minute. Given the dry fall and winter we had at the end of 2004 and the beginning of 2005, most of us in the region were expecting another growing season with low forage yields and dry stock ponds. We were saved with heavy rains in May that were 300% higher than average, and now we have a waving sea of grass across most of the landscape. Even in the wettest years, however, our shrubs and grasses use all the moisture stored in the soil. Regardless of the year, our forages go dormant and cure by early to mid-July. This abundance of cured grass in wetter years puts us at a greater risk of wildfires. We simply have more fine fuels on the ground to carry flames across the landscape. We'll spend the next couple of sessions talking about some of the management issues one faces when wildfires occur in their grazing allotments. Today we're talking about fires on our sagebrush bunchgrass rangelands. Fire has long been a component of our rangelands, and research suggests that historically our sagebrush landscapes may have burned at 30 to 50-year intervals. Healthy stands of our native bunchgrasses can tolerate fire and can typically recover in 1 to 2 growing seasons. If perennial bunchgrass density is such that one can step from plant to plant, then there is usually little need to reseed a site after a single burn. Perennial grasses may be slightly weakened by fire and during their first growing season not able to take advantage of the moisture and nutrients typically used by the now absent sagebrush. Cheatgrass can establish and flourish with the newly available resources. The following 1 or 2 years can be a risky interval for the site, and we should do all we can to assure the perennial grasses endure. Yesterday we mentioned that cheatgrass often appears in burned sagebrush bunchgrass sites the first growing season after a fire. This occurs because the bunchgrasses are not robust enough to use all the nutrients and water that was typically assimilated by the now absent sagebrush. This is a risky time for surviving grasses because cheatgrass can blanket the soil surface with a continuous carpet of fuel, leaving the stand at a much higher risk of burning again. A second fire can eliminate the already weakened bunchgrasses and perpetually convert the site to cheatgrass. If we can keep our grasses from burning a second time, the perennial grasses will crowd out cheatgrass in 1 or 2 more growing seasons, and we will have a much more productive and vigorous stand of forage than we started with. Research at EOARC has shown that removal of sagebrush with herbicides or fire can typically double the grass and forb yield on our arid rangelands. Recently we've been talking about how fire can remove sagebrush from our rangeland and nearly double forage yields. Research has shown that with conservative grazing, or even no grazing at all, that sagebrush will recolonize a burned area. In 20 to 30 years, we again return to the original sagebrush bunchgrass mix. Research also showed that for every 1% gain in sagebrush cover, we lose about 4% of our forage standing crop. This doesn't seem too significant until one realizes that sagebrush can cover as much as 12% of the soil surface, thereby affecting a 48% decrease in herbage. We all have a tendency to remember the best of times and manage our affairs to that standard. As sagebrush reinvades our pastures, however, we need to remember there will be less grass out there and lower our stocking rates as time passes. We may go from 1,000 pounds of grass per acre down to 500 pounds, and we don't want to risk overgrazing our grasses before the next fire occurs. Today we want to briefly address the issue of cattle management in rangeland pastures following fires. Wildfires are a particularly difficult issue for public land managers to deal with because they may be spotty in nature and affect only small portions of a pasture. Last fall we burned 42 acres in a 2,000-acre pasture at the experimental range. This past June, we put GPS collars on cattle for 16 days in that same pasture, and the cattle grazed almost exclusively in the burned area. Most likely they focused their attentions on the burn because all herbage was lush and green, while grasses elsewhere were a mixture of old and new growth. Had we left our cattle in that pasture much longer, the forages in the burned area might have suffered irreparable damage. If one is planning prescription fires for their pastures, we suggest one burn as large of an area as possible to avoid the focused grazing issue. Presently, we are studying grazing impacts on forages after fires and should have more information for you in about a year. I'm Dave Ganskopp, and we'll see you again.